The fight game is brutal, but what happens outside the cage can be even more devastating. Over the years, UFC, Pride, and MMA fans have celebrated unforgettable victories, only to be shocked when some of their heroes were taken far too soon. From champions who reached the very top to rising stars whose careers ended before they truly began, these stories reveal the heartbreaking side of combat sports. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll see how tragedy touched even the biggest names in MMA history, and why their legacies will never be forgotten. Evan Tanner's story is unlike any other in MMA. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a philosopher, a wanderer, a man who seemed as interested in the meaning of life as he was in championship belts. Tanner's path to greatness was self-taught. He literally learned how to fight by watching VHS tapes of martial arts techniques in the 1990s. Against all odds, this unconventional student of the game went on to fight and defeat some of the best in the world. In 2005, he reached the pinnacle of his career by capturing the UFC middleweight championship, etching his name in the history books. But what fans admired most wasn't just his ability to win, it was the way he approached life. Tanner was known for being introspective, writing blog posts about his beliefs, fears, and dreams. He wasn't flashy like many of his contemporaries. Instead, he was thoughtful, almost poetic, and fans connected deeply with that vulnerability. Yet beneath the surface, Tanner struggled with personal demons. He admitted to bouts of heavy drinking and depression, and even while fighting professionally, he was often living like a drifter, spending stretches of time alone in the desert, reflecting on life's bigger questions. In September 2008, Tanner set off on one of those solo desert trips, planning to ride his motorcycle into the California wilderness and camp in solitude. But tragedy struck. When his motorcycle broke down, Tanner found himself stranded. With no way to escape the brutal heat and no immediate help nearby, he succumbed to the elements. He was just 37 years old. The MMA world was shattered. Tributes poured in from fighters and fans alike, remembering him not just as a champion, but as a unique soul who embodied both strength and fragility. UFC President Dana White honored him, and many of Tanner's peers spoke about how he inspired them to embrace the journey of fighting, not just the destination. Today, Evan Tanner is remembered as a pioneer, a man who lived by his own rules, and whose tragic end serves as a reminder that even the strongest warriors can be undone by the unpredictability of life. Justin Eilers was the kind of fighter who represented toughness, grit, and perseverance. A heavyweight out of the famed Miletich fighting systems camp, he fought some of the most dangerous men of his era, including a UFC heavyweight title fight against Andrei Arlovsky in 2005. In that bout, Eilers pushed through incredible adversity, fighting with multiple injuries, proving his determination to never back down. Though he never wore UFC gold, his performances earned him respect as one of the division's toughest competitors. Eilers wasn't just a fighter, though. Teammates and coaches often described him as a friendly, upbeat presence in the gym, a man who would crack jokes and lighten the mood, even in grueling training sessions. He carried that charisma into his life outside of the octagon, where he was a dedicated father and beloved by those closest to him. His fighting career took him across the UFC, WEC, and Elite XC, where he battled the best heavyweights in the world. But on December 25, 2008, tragedy struck in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. While spending Christmas with family in Idaho, Eilers was caught in a domestic dispute that spiraled out of control. In the chaos, he was fatally shot once in the chest during an altercation with his stepfather. He was only 30 years old. News of his death spread quickly across the MMA world, leaving fans and fighters stunned. The MMA community poured out their grief on forums and social media. Colleagues remembered his work ethic, his humor, and his love for his family. For many, his passing was a harsh reminder that life outside the cage can sometimes be even more dangerous than anything fighters face under the lights. Justin Eilers' name might not always be mentioned among the champions of his era, but his heart, courage, and the tragedy of his loss ensured he would never be forgotten. His story is one of talent, resilience, and ultimately a devastating reminder of how fragile life can be. Few fighters embodied raw athleticism like Kevin the Monster Randleman. A former NCAA Division I wrestling champion, Randleman entered the UFC in the late 1990s and quickly established himself as one of the most explosive heavyweights in the sport. In 1999, he captured the UFC Heavyweight Championship, cementing his place in history. But it wasn't just his title that made him legendary. It was the way he fought. Every time Randleman stepped into the cage, fans expected fireworks. His most famous moment came in 2004 when he shocked the world by knocking out Mirko Cro Cop in Pride. At the time, Cro Cop was considered one of the scariest strikers alive, yet Randleman's speed and power silenced the critics. Later, he delivered another unforgettable highlight when he slammed Fedor Emelianenko on his head with a suplex that shook the MMA world. Though he didn't always win the big fights, Randleman's explosiveness and fearlessness made him a fan favorite everywhere he went. Behind the nickname The Monster, though, was a man known for his kindness. Friends and teammates often said Kevin lit up any room he entered. He loved to laugh, loved to tell stories, and had a magnetic personality that drew people to him. But his life outside the cage was not without struggles. Years of fighting, training, and health battles took their toll. In February 2016, tragedy struck when Randleman suddenly passed away at the age of 44 due to complications from pneumonia leading to heart failure. The MMA community was blindsided. Tributes poured in from legends and fans alike. UFC Hall of Famer Mark Coleman, one of his closest friends, spoke emotionally about Randleman's energy and heart, while fighters around the world remembered him as both a terrifying competitor and a warm, generous human being. Kevin Randleman was posthumously inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, ensuring his name will forever be honored among the sport's greatest. His story is a reminder of how fleeting greatness can be, how even a man as strong and vibrant as the Monster can be taken far too soon. His legacy lives on in highlight reels, in the memories of his fans, and in the countless fighters who were inspired by his fearless approach to the fight game. Kevin Ferguson, better known as Kimbo Slice, may be the most unorthodox star MMA has ever produced. Long before the UFC, he was an internet sensation. His backyard brawls went viral in the early 2000s, making him one of the first fighters to achieve global fame through online video. His fierce look, complete with a thick beard and piercing glare, turned him into a cultural figure before he even stepped into a professional cage. When he finally made his MMA debut in Elite XC, he was immediately pushed into the spotlight, drawing record-breaking TV ratings. Though raw in technique, Kimbo's sheer presence and knockout power made him must-see TV. He later competed on The Ultimate Fighter and fought in the UFC, where, despite his limitations, fans adored him for his authenticity and humility. His fights against legends like Ken Shamrock and his stint in Bellator proved one thing: Kimbo had charisma that no amount of promotion could manufacture. He was real, and fans connected with that. But in June 2016, just as Kimbo was preparing for another Bellator main event, tragedy struck. He passed away suddenly at age 42 due to heart complications. The MMA world was stunned. It felt impossible that such a larger-than-life figure could be gone. Fighters, promoters, and even celebrities outside the sport poured in tributes. Dana White, Shaquille O'Neal, and countless others praised Kimbo, not just for his impact on MMA, but for being a humble man who never forgot his roots. Fans remembered him as someone who turned street fights into stardom, a symbol of possibility for those who started with nothing. Kimbo Slice's story is both inspiring and tragic. He showed how raw determination and personality could make a man legendary, but his untimely passing cut short a career and life still filled with promise. Today, he remains the people's champion, proof that fighting spirit isn't about records, it's about heart. Stephan Bonnar will forever be remembered for one night, April 9, 2005, the finale of The Ultimate Fighter Season 1. His 3-round war with Forrest Griffin wasn't just a fight, it was the fight that saved the UFC. Broadcast live on Spike TV, it introduced millions of new fans to the sport. Dana White himself said that without Bonnar, the UFC would wouldn't be what it is today. Though Bonnar lost the decision, his heart and relentless spirit turned him into a household name. Both men were awarded UFC contracts on the spot, and the fight was enshrined in the Hall of Fame. Bonnar went on to face legends like Anderson Silva, John Jones, and Tito Ortiz, always delivering excitement. He was beloved for his toughness, blue-collar grit, and willingness to face anyone. Yet, like many fighters, Bonnar struggled with the toll of the sport. Years of injuries led to dependence on painkillers, and he wrestled with personal demons in the years after his fighting career slowed. In December 2022, tragedy struck when Bonnar passed away at just 45 years old. It was later revealed that his death was the result of an accidental overdose, tied to his ongoing struggles with pain management. The news sent shockwaves through MMA. Dana White called him one of the most important fighters in UFC history, while Forrest Griffin said he lost not just a rival, but a brother. Fans flooded social media with memories of that historic night in 2005, sharing how Bonnar's courage inspired them to fall in love with MMA. Stephan Bonnar's story is one of triumph and tragedy. He achieved immortality by helping put the UFC on the map, yet his later years exposed the hidden costs of a fighter's life. He will forever be remembered as a warrior whose legacy shaped the future of MMA, even as his personal battles remind us of the price so many fighters pay outside the cage. Anthony "Rumble" Johnson was one of the most terrifying knockout artists MMA had ever seen. Competing in the UFC across 4 different weight classes, from welterweight to heavyweight, Rumble became a fan favorite for his ability to end fights in an instant. His one-punch knockout power was legendary, and his highlight reel is among the most electrifying in UFC history. Twice he fought Daniel Cormier for the light heavyweight title, and though he fell short, he cemented himself as one of the most feared contenders of his generation. What made Rumble even more beloved was the contrast between his fighting style and his personality. Inside the cage, he was a destroyer. Outside of it, he was quiet, humble, and kind. Fighters who trained with him often spoke about how respectful he was, how much he cared about others, and how he never let his fearsome reputation change who he was. Fans and peers alike saw him as not just an incredible athlete, but a genuinely good man. In late 2022, however, the MMA world was stunned to learn of his untimely passing. At just 38 years old, Johnson lost a private battle with a rare illness. For months, fans speculated about his health as he withdrew from competition, but few expected such a devastating outcome. The community was heartbroken. Daniel Cormier, his greatest rival, delivered a heartfelt tribute, saying, "For a guy who struck fear in the hearts of so many, Anthony was one of the kindest people I ever met." Fighters across the UFC and Bellator shared similar sentiment, remembering not just the power of Rumble's fists, but the gentleness of his spirit. Anthony Johnson's death was a cruel reminder that even the strongest bodies can be felled by illness. His legacy lives on in every highlight reel knockout, every roar of the crowd that once erupted when he stepped into the cage. Rumble was more than a fighter. He was an example of how greatness can be carried with humility. His story is both inspiring and heartbreaking, a testament to the fragility of life and the enduring power of legacy. Josh Samman was more than just a UFC middleweight. He was a writer, a thinker, and a fighter who bared his soul. Rising to prominence on The Ultimate Fighter 17, he instantly stood out with his charisma and flair inside the cage. He scored spectacular finishes, including a famous head kick knockout that earned him a Performance of the Night bonus. Fans admired his wild style, but what made Samman truly unique was his openness. He chronicled his personal struggles in heartfelt blogs and in his memoir, The Housekeeper: Love, Death, and Prize Fighting, writing candidly about loss, addiction, and the pursuit of meaning in a brutal sport. But beneath his drive was deep pain. In 2013, Josh's longtime girlfriend died in a car accident. He never fully recovered. Admitting her loss pushed him into dark places. He continued to fight, but the shadows followed. In September 2016, tragedy struck when Josh was found unresponsive. After several days in a coma, he passed away at just 28 years old. Though the official cause was tied to a suspected overdose, the greater truth was clear. He had been fighting an internal war all along. The MMA community mourned heavily. Dana White, UFC colleagues, and journalists who had read his writings described him as a warrior poet, a man whose honesty helped others understand the struggles fighters face. His death sparked difficult conversations about mental health and substance abuse in the fight world. Even in tragedy, Samman's voice continues to resonate, reminding everyone that fighters are human, with victories and vulnerabilities both. Norifumi Kid Yamamoto was one of Japan's most electrifying fighters. At just 5 feet 4 inches, he was small in stature but enormous in presence. Fighting in K1 Heroes and later in Dream, Kid built a reputation as one of the fiercest lighter-weight fighters of the 2000s. His knockout power was extraordinary, with fans never forgetting his flying knee finishes and aggressive style. In Japan, he wasn't just an athlete, he was a superstar, a household name who helped legitimize lighter weight classes on the world stage. Kid came from a wrestling family and carried that pedigree proudly, but it was his charisma that made him an icon. Fans called him a superhero, with his bleached hair and fearless walkouts. He later fought in the UFC, though injuries and age dulled the explosiveness that once made him unbeatable. Still, his influence was undeniable. Fighters like Dominic Cruz and Joseph Benavidez cited him as an inspiration. In 2018, Yamamoto announced that he was battling cancer. Just weeks later, on September 18th, he passed away at only 41 years old. The news devastated Japan's MMA community and echoed around the world. Fighters paid tribute to him as a pioneer who proved that smaller athletes could capture global attention. Dana White and UFC stars posted messages of respect, while fans held vigils outside his gym, Crazy B, in Tokyo. His death was a national loss, a reminder of how fleeting even the brightest stars can be. Kid Yamamoto's legacy is not only in his record, but in the countless fighters he inspired to step into the cage. Victoria Lee was destined for greatness. The youngest member of the famed Lee fighting family, she followed in the footsteps of her siblings Angela and Christian, both champions in one championship. Nicknamed the Prodigy, Victoria began her pro career at just 16 years old, immediately impressing fans with her composure and skill. She went undefeated in her first 3 fights, blending sharp striking with slick submissions, showing all the signs of a future champion. But what made Victoria so beloved wasn't just her fighting, it was her kindness. Friends and family described her as warm, generous, and humble. A girl who balanced martial arts stardom with schoolwork and baking for her siblings after their fights. She had the world ahead of her, and fans believed they were watching the start of a long, storied career. Then came the unthinkable. On December 26, 2022, Victoria passed away at just 18 years old. At first, her family only announced her passing without details, leaving fans stunned and heartbroken. Tributes poured in from the MMA world and beyond. One championship CEO, Chatri Sitiodtong, called her a beautiful soul with a heart of gold. Angela Lee later revealed that Victoria had taken her own life after struggling quietly with mental health. The revelation sparked widespread conversations about the pressures of young athletes and the importance of mental health awareness. Fans around the world grieved the loss of someone so young, so talented, and so full of promise. In her short time on Earth, Victoria Lee touched countless lives. Her family continues to honor her memory through foundations and tributes, ensuring that her story raises awareness and helps others. Victoria's legacy is heartbreaking but powerful, proof that even the brightest stars can burn out far too soon. Ryan Jimmo was a Canadian light heavyweight who brought something unique to the UFC, a combination of karate precision, knockout power, and a quirky personality that fans adored. Making his UFC debut in 2012, Jimmo needed only 7 seconds to land a devastating head kick knockout, tying the record for one of the fastest finishes in UFC history. When the fight ended, He broke into his trademark robot dance inside the octagon, cementing himself as both a serious competitor and an entertainer. That moment instantly made him a fan favorite. Over his career, Jimmo built a reputation as a highly skilled martial artist with deep karate roots. He was a former MFC light heavyweight champion and had faced some of the toughest fighters in the UFC. But beyond the wins and losses, Jimmo was widely respected for his intelligence, kindness, and humility. Friends and teammates often described him as thoughtful, almost academic in the way he approached life. Fans who met him outside of the cage were struck by how approachable he was, always ready with a smile or a story. But on June 26, 2016, tragedy struck in the most shocking and senseless way. After a minor dispute in a parking lot in Edmonton, Jimmo was struck by another driver who intentionally hit him with their vehicle. He died from his injuries at only 34 years old. The MMA world was horrified. To lose a fighter to something so sudden, so avoidable, was almost impossible to process. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from around the world. Fighters and coaches remembered Jimmo as not just a competitor, but as one of the kindest men in the sport. His teammates held memorial services in his honor, and UFC commentators highlighted his legacy during broadcasts, urging fans to remember the joy he brought to the cage. In Edmonton, his community organized tributes that celebrated both his martial arts career and his generous spirit. Jimmo's death is remembered as one of the most tragic losses in MMA history, not just because of how it happened, but because of the type of man he was. A talented martial artist, a fan favorite with his robot celebration, and a person who carried himself with humility and grace. He may not have held UFC gold, but his impact on those who knew him and the fans who cheered for him is undeniable. His legacy reminds us that the true measure of a fighter isn't just in titles, it's in character, in spirit, and in how deeply they touch the lives of others.